Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, this is Fight, and today I want to show you guys how to effectively double or even triple your group's damage in Path of Exile. So first of all, this is a support build. It is a group reliant build, so it's not something that you can play on your own, which does make the leveling process just a little bit awkward if you decide to use this build as you level up. But if you for example play with a group of friends, it's definitely something you should consider. Alright, so let's take a look at what this build actually does. The curses I typically use are critical weakness, elemental weakness, projectile weakness, and vulnerability. I can use a fifth one, for example flammability, conductivity, or frostbite, but I feel that these curses are a bit too build specific. And if your group's damage is decent, you shouldn't even have the time to get the fifth curse off before everything dies. On hard maps, on hard bosses, you can obviously use Enfeeble or Temp Chains instead of some of these curses. Just mix and match depending on your group setup. On top of that, I use Arc or Shock Nova for shocking. You should really try to get these with high quality because it gives you an additional chance to shock, and Shock Nova is much better at shocking, but it has the disadvantage of requiring you to be kind of close up to the enemies, and because this build isn't exactly tanky, that's not usually where you want to be. Before I go into too much detail about this build, I want to just quickly show you guys what this looks like in maps. So usually support builds are a little bit boring, a little bit passive, because you don't get involved in combat too much. But with this build we also have shock stacks on top of our curses, so we can kind of determine and decide just how much we want to involve ourselves in the combat. We can just go ahead and curse these mobs over here and hide behind a tree somewhere and wait for our team to sort us out. But what we could do instead is play a bit more aggressively. Can get our curses up here, and after they're up we can just spam arc and make our group do even more crazy damage. And why is this? So if you guys don't know this, lightning damage has a chance to put the shock status effect on targets, which increases their damage taken from all sources by 30%, and this can stack up to 3 times. And that means if you have a high enough chance to shock and a high enough shock duration, you can get up to 90% more damage taken from all sources pretty easily. And it gets to a pretty crazy range there. So because we also use elemental proliferation, these shock stacks are then spread to nearby enemies. So as you can see here, if I shoot one of these guys, all of them are going to be shocked. And this radius is actually increased by nodes like these in the skill tree. And what you will notice with this kind of build is that people might be a bit skeptical at first when you tell them that you don't deal damage. But once they've seen it in action, once they have seen how much damage they deal because of your curses, because of your shock stacks, they're gonna fall in love with you pretty much immediately. Expect them to invite you to friends. They're gonna ask you to join their parties in the future, and honestly guys, you're never gonna have to play alone again once people acknowledge that you play this kind of build. So that's pretty cool, and I think we should go ahead and look at the talent tree here for a moment. We could be a Scion or we could be a Witch. I was actually just moving towards the Witch area myself here. We could potentially be a Templar as well, but there's a couple of fairly inefficient nodes that in my opinion make it not worthwhile. But if you like the Templar, I suppose it's not that big of a deal. So the first thing we definitely go to is a Hexmaster. In the beginning your curses have a very short duration, so this essentially means you don't need to recast your curses, and especially on bosses that is a kind of a big deal. Whispers of Doom for obvious reasons, because we want to put more than just one curse on the targets. These maximum mana nodes here are the regen nodes, just like the ones in the rest of this tree here. You just pick them up whenever it's convenient, whenever you feel like you just need more regeneration to keep up with cursing and shocking. Static blows is extremely good in the start because Arc and Shock Nova are gonna do so much damage until higher up maps and stuff. Sovereignty, I believe, was the second thing I went to because I wanted to support several auras as fast as possible. That's why I went through the middle after that, and I picked up these nodes, and again I picked up these aura nodes and these aura nodes up here. I just wanted to make sure that I could support using all 3 purity auras as fast as possible, and especially in new leagues this is very, very good because your party doesn't need to worry about getting resistances as much as they normally would. And resistance gear in new leagues, in fresh leagues, are kind of hard to get by. It's kind of difficult to get all your resistances capped in Merciless. So that gives you kind of an advantage when it's, for example, a 1-week race, or if the league, the long-term league, is just started. So I think that's, if you run with friends, this is really, really good. And the blast radius nodes here, I think I took them at around 60 or 70, I'm not quite sure. You could maybe take them earlier if you really wanted the area for your curses, but I feel it's just not necessary. And the biggest deal here is the Chaos Inoculation. So if you guys haven't been Chaos Inoculation before, I recommend you don't take this node until you have approximately 3000 or maybe even 4000 energy shield. And because this is a Chaos Inoculation build, you should probably look into leveling with a couple of these life nodes. And what do we have here? Life and mana, life and mana. We have here some life, and down here, and I think that's almost everything. And once you feel comfortable, once you feel like you have enough energy shield, you can just ditch these life nodes, you can respec them, and go Chaos Inoculation, take these nodes. And Infused Shield is a really, really big deal because unlike these increased nodes here, these increased nodes actually stack on top of each other. It stacks onto your base, but these this node here, the More node, actually adds onto it adds on everything else. So after all the increased happened, the more happens. So what this means for me, for example, I have 8.6k ES right now. It would mean approximately 920 energy shield, I believe, for me if I ditch this node. So that's kind of a big deal. So what about gear? You guys are probably wondering why it says here my items require more strength and dex. So let's have a look at that. So the reason why it says I require more dexterity and strength is because of this unique right here, which, as you can see, reduces the attribute requirements. For example, the projectile weakness here would require a dexterity of 138. But because we have this amulet, it only requires something like 103, I believe. And I wouldn't actually have 138, and that's why it says I require more, when as long as I have this amulet, I really do not. This amulet is pretty much a requirement because of the incredibly high amount of mana regeneration and a maximum mana. Doge's Damnings, you need 2 of these in order to be able to put 4 curses on at the same time. Ephemeral Edge is almost a requirement as well. You can replace this with a wand with high spell damage and high lightning damage, so you're able to shock the mobs more, to be more offensive. But if we take this off here for a second, as you can see, I lose 1,300 ES. But if you don't mind this big ES hit, then you can replace it for that wand to be more aggressive. Rainbow Strides is not a requirement at all. I really like using them because of the maximum mana, but as an alternative, for example, you could use something like this here, the Wind Screams, which, as I've mentioned earlier, they would they would make you able to put an additional curse on the target, and that could essentially mean that you could put temp chains and enfeeble, as well as 3 offensive curses on your targets. So you could potentially do maps or bosses that you would otherwise not be able to do. Especially in new leagues, this is very helpful, so you can step into harder content that you otherwise just wouldn't be able to do yet, or that would be too dangerous for you. Another interesting unique here is the Leercast. This reduces your own damage by 30%, which is a little bit counterproductive because it will mean you shock less, but it increases your allies' damage by 15% each, which is pretty crazy. But it does, however, have a very low energy shield. So again, if you don't mind taking the ES hit here, you can use this, but personally I wouldn't recommend it because I would rather have a much higher ES pool, just to make sure that I can't possibly die from anything. So the rest of the gear here is a fairly generic CI gear. I do have a fair bit of resistance from my gear. Your gear does not have to be as good as this stuff. You can substitute the lack of resistances by, for example, switching your discipline for a purity here. And I'll put you at a pretty crazy resistances, as you can tell. And let's look at the links here. So we have faster casting with the weaknesses: elemental weakness, crit weakness, and projectile weakness. Faster casting again with temp chains and usually enfeeble. And then we have the main link here, which is arc or shock nova, added lightning damage, lightning penetration, elemental proliferation, and the 5th one would be faster casting. We have here the aura link number 1, which is purity of ice, purity of elements, purity of lightning, and reduced mana. And again, an aura link here, reduced mana, purity of fire, clarity, and discipline. Then we have cast when damage taken level 1, just to make sure it procs all the time, and during cry level 5 to still be able to trigger it, because if I level it more then it wouldn't be able to trigger anymore. Arctic armor is pretty much my only, or almost my only physical defense with this kind of build. It reduces small hits very well, and especially on fire hits. For example, the LMP dogs in docks that you may have encountered before, they will not actually hit you at all anymore. They will not do a single damage to you. So that's pretty cool right there. And you don't actually need these faster castings, by the way. You can substitute them by either an increased area of effect, or you could just use the curses on its own. That's completely fine. I just like using the faster casting to get my cursing done, so I can move on to shocking the mobs as well. So on the switch weapon here, this is not really important, but I like to have a lightning warp with faster casting and reduced duration here, just for movement purposes really, and platforming purposes, but it's not at all required. Then we have here just some random switch things, like you can put whatever curses here. I have my shock nova here and a haste actually, and haste is something you could consider using, as well as other auras like vitality, or whichever you feel could be good for your group setup. But you have to consider that this is kind of late game, this is kind of end game, when you can substitute for the lack of resistances that you're gonna take when you replace these purity auras. So what about flasks? I think flasks are pretty much a personal choice. For me, I like to have a granite, a topaz with shocked, a sapphire with frozen, because I can get frozen very easily with CI, a quartz just to make sure if I get cornered I have a quick way out. So I pop the quicksilver and the quartz just to get the hell out of dodge again. And I think that covers just about everything, guys. So if you have any more questions, there's gonna be a link to my Twitch channel in the description. So if you have questions, just check me out there. I'll try to help you out with whatever questions you have, and I hope you enjoyed the guide, and I will see you guys around.